And with that, I want to make a bridge also to the next speakers, because we have people who will who know this region quite well because they have been active there. So I want to ask the two other people of the panel to come forward. First, Kenneth Suleiman, born in Paramaribo, came to the Netherlands at a young age and was active for the National Organization of Surinamese Organizations in the Netherlands, better known as the LOSON, which was focused on nation building and the struggle for national self-determination of Suriname and the struggle in the Netherlands against the racist divide and conquer politics such as the spreidingsbeleid, in the English spreading policy, and the area of housing, including the squatting action in the Bijlmer. But he was also active in the anti-apartheid movement against the war in Vietnam and in the anti-colonial struggle of the peoples of Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, which I just mentioned. And then, of course, we have Artin Utrecht. Yes, please also come forward. Who came to the Netherlands from Indonesia when she was 20 years old. She worked for 24 years on rights-related issues with the development organization HIVOS. She also took part in the organizing committee of the International People's Tribunal 1965, held in The Hague in 2015, which dealt with the anti-communist massacres of the Western-backed Suharto dictatorship. And she currently writes political and literary essays and is co-founder of Watch 65. Give both of them a warm round of applause. So, since we were already speaking about Southern Africa, I wanted to start with you, Kenneth, maybe you can tell us, at the start I showed some of the pictures and some of them were maybe familiar, some of them less so. And one of them I had on there that you might not have noticed was Chris Hani. And I'm curious if you can tell us who Chris Hani was and why does barely anybody know Chris Hani, but everybody knows, for example, Nelson Mandela?
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you. Before I go to Chris Hani, I would like to mention something you showed in your previous slide about the 3 countries where my country, Suriname, is not right projected, because on the left
I'm so sorry.
We have this piece that is not part of Suriname now, as you have projected.
I'm so sorry. I was in a rush. I did it 5 minutes.
Okay.
Fine.
It is...
my apologies. My apologies.
Okay. Just sideline.
Yes.
Another colonial legacy.
Yes,
yeah.
It is a legacy of colonialism.
So there you go. The first thing you Google is this is what you get, huh?
Yes. On the other side, the neighbors of Suriname are the Guyanas. We are one of the Guyanas. You have the British Guyana, the Dutch Guyana, and the French Guyana. Those 3 countries there. And they divided the land between each other. And when the British came, they said, this is ours. And then when the French came, this is ours. Yeah. That's why it's an area which is not quite agreed upon.
Right. Okay. Which is a problem the colonizers have caused all over the world.
All over the world, and you can see in Africa how they draw the lines, just like that.
Yeah.
Okay, Chris Hani. Chris Hani was a born South African freedom fighter. At a young age, as I have found out, 15 years, he went into the political movement for liberation of South Africa and became active in the Communist Party of South Africa, but also within the African National Congress. The relation between the Communist Party of South Africa and the National Congress is that the leadership came from the party. The party leaders were in the national executive of the ANC, like Nelson Mandela and Chris Hani. Yeah. So they had leading positions as communists in the national movement. Yeah. That is something that grew out of the struggle they were fighting underground. And Chris Hani was very critical within the ANC about leadership, but also one of the pioneers of starting the armed struggle with Umkhonto we Siwezi, the spear of the nation, the armed wing of the ANC. Also led mostly by cadres of the Communist Party.
Yeah.
And he was more in organizing those kind of activities, while Mandela went in the name for the ANC to a lot of international conferences in Africa, in Europe, America. So he was mostly seen as the face of the ANC in other countries. And after his, when he was sentenced, he became the symbol of resistance. And there was quite a large movement in solidarity with the struggle of the ANC all over the world in the 60s. But it's also a period after the Second World War where many other countries in the world were fighting for their national independence, not only in Africa, but also in Asia, Latin America. And it was the call for democracy in the world. Yeah. The call for emancipation, the call for self-determination, the call for independence, and for a development that was not capitalistic.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I'm making a jump. You can talk about the Bandung Conference for looking for another way out of capitalism.
Right.
For development.
Yeah, and like the ANC Freedom Charter, for example, it's not widely known, but they actually wanted to nationalize the industries, take back the land. That was a very important part of the program of the entire.
They had a political and economical alternative.
Right.
That's what the point is.
Yeah.
And Hani was very much active in the underground of the party and in the ANC. And well, as we know, he was brutally murdered by this fascist police.
I'm not sure everybody here knows, but yes, but he was assassinated.
He
by
was,
leaders.
well, when the victory came closer for the ANC in the 1990s, he was still banned in that time. He wasn't allowed to have political activities there. He wasn't even allowed to stay in South Africa. And many people like Nelson Mandela were subjected to this law, this anti-communist law from 1950 in South Africa, which forbid the Communist Party, which forbid the ANC, etc.
Yeah. And so Nelson Mandela he was imprisoned specifically because he was a communist.
Yes.
This was specifically the charge against him. Actually, if it's okay, I wanted to
go on.
show, because I do think, there you go.
Yeah.
This is actually his defense in court. I think it's 1961 by heart. So he's imprisoned for 27 years for being a communist. And this is how he defends himself. I hope I can read properly. He says, for many decades, communists were the only political group in South Africa who were prepared to treat Africans as human beings and their equals, who were prepared to eat with us, talk with us, live with us, and work with us. They were the only political group which was prepared to work with the Africans for the attainment of political rights and a stake in society. Because of this, there are many Africans who today tend to equate freedom with communism. In the international field, communist countries have always come to our aid. In the United Nations and other councils of the world, the communist bloc has supported the Afro-Asian struggle against colonialism and often seems to be more sympathetic to our plight than some of the Western powers. Today I am attracted by the idea of a classless society, an attraction which springs in part from Marxist readings and in part from my own admiration of the structure and organization of early African societies in this country. The land, then the main means of production at the time, belonged to the tribe. There were no rich or poor and there was no exploitation. It is true, as I have already stated, that I have been influenced by Marxist thought, but this is also true of many of the leaders of the new independent states. Such widely different persons as Gandhi, Nehru, Nkrumah, and Nasser all acknowledge this fact. We all accept the need for some form of socialism to enable our people to catch up with the vast countries of this world and to overcome their legacy of extreme poverty. But this does not mean we are Marxists. He actually was, but he had to deny it, obviously. But yes, go on.
Okay. My involvement with the anti-apartheid struggle, though, wasn't with the ANC first.
Okay.
Or even not even with the ANC, but with another organization in South Africa who split from the ANC. That was the Pan-Africanist Congress. I have some slides here where you can see that we also joined in these activities as LOSON for protest demonstrations and all kinds of meetings with people from the PAC, the Cibico, who we met, and other high-ranking leaders. That was a period where there was very much social unrest in the world on apartheid and the anti-apartheid struggle. So, and also in the neighborhood of South Africa itself, the neighboring countries, there were many recently independent countries who supported the ANC. They let them train their guerrillas, for instance, in those countries. And like Hani, Hani got his military education in one of the neighboring countries from South Africa, and also in many other African countries there was this Pan-Africanist movement coming up, also succeeded by another movement which is not so known, but the one figure who is very well known, that is Steve Biko. Biko was a member of the Black Consciousness movement, who was mainly doing work on the ideological, psychological struggle. What apartheid means for somebody being black, for instance, the color question, put it like that. How apartheid and colonialism to take away, as Vedra also rightly mentioned, the identity, your whole being not being recognized. And that was something which Biko also put forward in his works and in his studies. Another thing what I haven't mentioned yet is that the ANC got many help also from other liberation movements, like in Zimbabwe, then called Rhodesia. Yeah. There also was help from the ZAPU, the armed wing also from the liberation movement in Rhodesia or Zimbabwe now. Other countries also. Yeah. And Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau. We have seen here Amilcar Cabral from Guinea-Bissau. Who we haven't seen is Mr. Samora Machel from Mozambique.
Yes.
He also inspired us with his works and his struggle, the LOSON, in our organization.
Right, right. Yeah, and this is something people don't often realize. You know, apartheid South Africa, it was an entire regional struggle.
Yes, also.
And it was also a very bloody struggle. You know, about 2 million people died. If we just look at Angola and Mozambique, it was actual warfare, and this is not often really realized. I'm gonna park it a little bit there because I want to get to you, Artin, and I want to hear about Indonesia and specifically the role of the PKI, the Communist Party of Indonesia, in the anti-colonial struggle within Indonesia. And I want to preface that also with one comment that's good to realize is that actually the largest non-governing Communist Party in the history of humanity was the Communist Party of Indonesia. And this is also one of these things to realize is, yes, Marxism might have, you know, started in Europe if we, you know, identify it specifically as the ideological tradition of Marx, but it definitely moved from there. And in fact, the main weight of it shifted to the Global South. And obviously the PKI was a huge part of that, so I'm very interested if you can explain us a little bit about the role they played.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. Thank you all also for introducing me. Yeah, you're right. Throughout Southeast Asia at least, but I think all of Asia, the Communist parties emerged in the 20s, let's say, but indeed, the PKI was established in May 1920, was the first one. For a great deal, thanks to a Dutch communist named Henk Sneevliet, yes, who turned his radical social democratic party, ISDV, into the PKI. Well, initially, the party was part of a broader movement centered in Central Java, and it has its social base and political base in the Islamic, also in the Islamic Union, Sarekat Islam, a large grassroots organization with tens of thousands of members. Small traders, workers, teachers, bound in radical anti-colonial, by radical anti-colonial ideas with an Islamic brand. In those years, party influential leaders like Semaun and Tan Malaka, I missed Tan Malaka in your row of pictures, were the most active. And led by a series of pretty large workers' strikes. And a strong union worth mentioning was the Union of Railways and Tram Workers. Well, the strikes were challenging, of course, because the Netherlands in the security police, the PID, used to react violently with arrests and beatings. And the colonial government was also kept busy at that time in controlling and censoring a large number of newspapers and flyers deemed communist or leftist. But internally, there were also challenges within the PKI due to issues of strategy, like who to embrace and whom not. And indeed, there were close contacts from the beginning, right from the beginning, with the Communist International and the Soviet Union through the Communist International. The communist parties are expected to follow the so-called thesis of the Communist International, and so did the PKI. One of these theses was how to deal with religion, especially the Islam. And at that time, there was a lot of debate about pan-Islamism. And yeah, on the ground in the East, and so for the PKI it was always difficult to, let's say, harmonize the directives or the thesis of the Communist International with the realities in their own social environment. And so it happened that at one point the Sarekat Islam split up in two, and the PKI lost a large base and shrank to that of a much smaller organization, a socialist, the socialist SE, the Sarekat Rakyat. And this was actually a serious setback.
Yeah.
And another...
I think just also to generalize a little bit, because I think this is a tendency that we see a lot also, that people need to apply it to their own context. And I think some of the most successful parties were also able to say, this dictate from the Communist Internationals maybe that doesn't apply so much. But yeah, please go on.
Yeah, but there were tensions.
Right, exactly.
And at least the Sarekat Islam left at a certain point. And another thing is also, what also was an issue, strategic issue, is when is the basis of a party strong enough, let's say, to be able to, to launch a revolt or revolution, let's say. And that also is brought the PKI into troubles. Some party leaders, radical workers and peasant unions in West Java and West Sumatra, and by 1925, already waited for the PKI leadership to stage a revolt, actually. And some of the party leaders gave in, and yes, others not, like Tan Malaka, for example. But then the revolts in those two regions broke out, indeed. And of course they were not ready. The colonial government and its security section immediately reacted, and the entire revolution was violently crushed. And 4,500 party leaders, more or less, and members were imprisoned, and some 1,300 exiled to Bovendigel, the concentration camp far away.
Right. Was the first Dutch concentration camp was built in Indonesia.
Yeah. And it was absolutely disastrous.
Yeah.
So the party was officially banned and went underground, only to emerge again after World War II in 1945. So the 1930s were pretty tough. The colonial government and the intelligence branch got more repressive and hyper alert for any challenge to its rule, and a big fear for any anti-colonial voice, but even bigger fear for communism.
Right.
Yeah. And and what happened actually then, after 1926, with the anti-colonial struggle, in the colony itself, it moved to more radical nationalist leaders, not communists, but nationalist leaders like Sukarno, until he was also exiled. And some individual communists and socialists who were not imprisoned went underground or spent their energies to working in alliances with more moderate groups, let's say. And this is interesting, with Tan Malaka and a few other PKI leaders managed to flee to neighboring countries and to Singapore and to Philippines, and helped to stimulate the establishment and the growth of communist parties there in Malaya, Malaya, yeah? And in the Philippines even. So you can see that the communist movement, the leftist anti-colonial struggle too, has always been very truly internationalist actually. And the Netherlands, in the Netherlands there was also some movement in the 30s. In the 20s and the 30s, quite a number of Indonesian anti-colonial leaders came there to study. And many joined the Perhimpunan Indonesia, that Indonesian association. And they had there, of course, in the Netherlands, a little bit more freedom than in their own country to politically school themselves and build networks with like-minded souls and work closely with the CPH, the Communist Party of Holland, at the time. And the CPH actually was the first and only Dutch party that since 1918 already campaigned for decolonization. Indië los van Holland. Yeah. So, and also they did a lot of international work at that time from the Netherlands. So in those years, representatives of the PI took part in international anti-imperialist networks with branches in Berlin, Paris, Moscow, London. And one example was the League Against Imperialism and Colonial Oppression.
Right, which I also mentioned before in the presentation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It was linked to the Communist International.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. And this network also had contacts with nationalist and communist leaders in China, Vietnam, India, and some African countries. And last but not least, in the Netherlands, the PI had also frequent close contacts with anti-colonial leaders from other Dutch colonies, well, mainly from Suriname. And we know that Anton de Kom, for example, attended the meetings of the PI very often. And it was also important to mention that during World War II, the PI decided to temporarily shore up the struggle for the Indonesian independence in order to join the anti-fascist, anti-Nazi resistance, because that was more urgent at that time. And they helped Jewish families to go into hiding. They were involved in producing clandestine newspapers. They act as messengers between resistance groups. And well, we know that this work was very, very dangerous. And in 1940, the chairman of the PI was arrested by the Nazi, not because he was from the PI, because that was, of course, not so much in the picture, but a top functionary also of the CPH at that time. And some of the Indonesian resistors were finally shot by the German occupiers, crippled and died. Some in Nazi concentration camps. Well, Anton de Kom had the same fate, And well, most of the PI members who survived the World War II, at some point in time in the 40s, they returned to Indonesia to take up again their anti-colonial struggle there. And in the 50s, they contributed to building the new nation. By taking positions in the parliament or in government. And for Indonesia at that time, the anti-colonial struggle was not ended. I mean, it was not ended with the defeat of the Japanese, because the Dutch came back to recolonize, and then the things become very, very violent. Between 45 and 49, it was real revolution. and marked by fierce armed fights between the Dutch troops on the one hand and the Republican troops on the other, flanked by all kinds of local combatant groups. And the colonial war left enormous devastations and many losses of lives, especially on the Indonesian side. It was chaos, actually. And in this situation that there were all the ingredients of a cocktail, let's say, to lead to another tragic episode for the leftist anti-colonial movement, reminding us to the debacle in 1926, yeah? And that is the Madiun affair.
Right. In 1926, you're referring to the first armed revolt, right?
Yeah.
And then we get the first concentration camp in the Netherlands.
Yeah,
People
and
are deported to
now we have the second
Decolonial.
one, and that was the Madiun affair in 1948. And, well, what was this chaos, actually? I mean, first we had this tough official negotiations that the representatives of the Republic had with the Dutch, had to undergo with the Dutch. Second, to get control of the huge variety of combatant groups, the militia, the so-called Lashkar. The army started a rationalization. That means integrate all these groups into its structure and its ranks. But the Lashkar resisted this policy.
The Lashkar?
The Lashkar.
Yeah.
There's the militias, yeah.
Yeah.
So this led again to all kinds of local clashes spread all over the place, you know. And then there are the ideological and strategic difference in the leftist movement itself. The movement was fragmented, despite their efforts to hold the groups together. And PKI was, at that time, only one of the players in this movement, not even a prominent one. And then the fourth element was that this all played at the backdrop of the upcoming Cold War.
Right.
Because the US entered the scene as well with its fierce anti-communism, and it brought it into the scene. So the Madiun affair began with an armed leftist youth group called Pesindo, who entered the region of Madiun in East Java in anticipation of attacks against them. They tried to get the foothold there in Madiun and proclaimed an autonomous left local government, so-called the National Front. But again, I mean, the thing was crushed very easily. I mean, very soon the whole uprising was crushed by the Republican troops, and immediately the Republican government labeled the affair as the PKI rebellion, although the PKI itself had a very little role in that. And some even spoke of a coup to set up a Soviet-supported and a Soviet-like communist state in Madiun. So there were arrests and detentions, and 11 leaders of the left, including some of the returned PI members from the Netherlands, were executed. So it was very traumatic, this Madiun affair. And it politically deepened the cleavages between the left, the army, and the Islamic groups, with a lasting impact on, on the political power configuration later on in the subsequent decades, and even on the formal historical narrative until today.
Yeah, and you're hinting already at 1965. What's going to happen there?
Yeah.
I'm going to park that for a little bit.
Yeah,
We're going to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And 1965 was the major anti-communist massacres, but we're going to get there more extensively later. I want to turn to you, Kenneth. and talk also. What was actually the first reason that I invited you? It was actually nice to hear that you have been involved with all these international solidarity actions, also with Southern Africa and Vietnam. But that was not actually why I asked you. I asked you to talk about the LOSON, which is much more local in Amsterdam, and because we saw, and this came back in both of your stories, how internationalist these organizations were. Even in the case of Indonesia, you had someone like Henk Sneevliet, who's this white Dutch man, but he's from a working class background. He gives everything also in the anti-colonial struggle, gets deported here, and gets Anton de Kom and others gets killed here during the World War II resistance. But of course, we also had the LOSON here, right? We had the Surinamese organizations here. And I'm curious, and this is maybe also, it is of course very inspiring to learn about how the PKI was doing things, but maybe this is even more relevant because obviously this is our context. And I'm curious, Kenneth, if you can explain a little bit about what the LOSON was, what kind of maybe class or Marxist analysis was useful for the struggle, and how you embarked upon the struggle. Sketch the scene for us.
Okay. To start with, the LOSON was not the first organization, left organization of Surinamers in Holland. Already back in the first organization is the On Suriname, established in 1918. It was then not really left organization, it was more a nationalist organization. And it was only in the 60s when Otto Huiswoud became chairman of that organization, the political discussion on independence and decolonialism started within the Surinamese Dutch community. But also already in the 30s, Anton de Kom went to Suriname to organize the people, and as we know, he was banned back to Holland and was forbidden to be active in Suriname. There were not as many Surinamers then when I came here to Holland, like now. When I came to Holland, it was in 1970, a few thousand Surinamers were living here. You can, as a small community, we all knew about each other, and most of the Surinamers say to each other, we are all family. So we knew each other very close, and the contacts were very easily made. We were a small minority, and we found always a way to join together with special occasions. And the first left-wing groups were student groups in the late 60s and in the beginning of the 70s. There was this group in Leiden, for instance, the Surinamese students, and they published the first illegal copy of the work of Anton de Kom, Wij Slaven van Suriname. There was a whole exhibition on that in Leiden, how that process developed. It was discovered by one of the students somewhere in an archive, and they said, no, this is our history and we don't even know about it. So, in fact, our history, as our people's history, to call it that way, was first put forward for the Surinamese people by Anton de Kom. That was his historical merit. And he explained that very good, that one of the methods of colonialism is denying your own history, your own struggle, and we were not taught about Maroons in the way we talk about it today. They were criminals. That is what I taught in school. They were burning the city, burning the plantations, and criminals should be hanged, and that's all. And the punishment was very severe on the Maroon who fought. Three of them are very well known: Baron Boni and Chauliqueur, three of the Maroon leaders in Suriname, who fought this guerrilla war. And that history, we never knew that. Also, we never knew many things that Dutch government did behind the back of the Surinamese people with, for instance, other imperialist countries like the United States or America or England or France. Because England and France are the two colonial powers from the neighboring countries. And they had many secret, how do you call it, contracts with each other. For instance, after the abolishing slavery, the Dutch government made a contract with the English government to get the places that were open in the plantations filled by people from India and Indonesia, and they got the permission of the British to get people from there. So that's why after abolishing slavery, after even 10 years, 1873, the Indian people and the Japanese, mostly from Java, were brought to Suriname to work on the plantations. The conditions were almost similar, like in slavery, because they stayed in the same cabins the slaves were held. They had to work the same time, but after the abolishing slavery, they got just a little. They got paid 6 cents for a man and 4 cents for a woman for day work. Those were the things that were happening, and when we started getting this knowledge about our own history, and in fact getting some national pride, that was in the middle of the 60s. In the 60s, there was this nationalist movement in Suriname, led by the Partai Nationalist Republic, it's called. But that party was, well, not left-wing nationalist, really. It was mostly looking for a compromise, and even, well, not the interest of the Surinamese people first.
Yeah. Maybe it's good to emphasize, because
I want to.
I'm going to get back to you, but just when you say the word nationalist, and maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, in the Dutch context, people always think nationalist by definition is right-wing. But within the leftist tradition, obviously, there was, a distinction made between colonized nations fighting for their liberation and chauvinists basically, having their right-wing nationalism to forward their, colonial imperial agendas. But please go on just to clarify that. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So in the beginning of the 70s, all these different groups, students from Amsterdam, from Utrecht, from Wageningen. Important to mention Wageningen, because Wageningen is where the University of Agriculture is situated. And they had this project also in a Surinamese town called Wageningen. And they were exchanging experiments and cultivating rice, for instance, or other things. And the dependence of the knowledge of developing our country came from those kind of students. So they were the ones who brought the knowledge to get economic development in Suriname. Also, let's say the scholars came from, there were students returning to Suriname in our country. we didn't have a university until after independence.
Yeah.
So it was very difficult to get into scientific works, and most of them were only through specialized bookshops you could get them. Yeah. Then in 73, all these organizations decided to join together and formed LOSON. And that was a huge victory, in fact. But don't forget, in those days already, you had different directions within the Suriname movement, because not only LOSON was active, you had this Surinamese committee, Suriname Committee, or Aluminium Committee, as it was called, working with other people in Suriname, and we decided to join with the Democratic People's Front. That is a front organization consisting of a workers' organization, the Organization of Socialist Workers, with laborers on the land, Federation of Poor Land Laborers, with women, the Progressive Women Union, with the Youth Actions Group, and other groups. So this front was a very, quite large-based front, and we were the Dutch department of that front organization, which was led by the Communist Party of Suriname, Marxist-Leninist, as it was called then. This party was also founded in 1973, on the 24th of June 1973. It was founded, and the founders already had a communist tradition in Suriname, because in 1969 there was this huge strike from the teachers. Like today, I thought I heard 5,000 people on the Dam today. Congratulations with the UvA. This strike in 1969 was so huge that it forced the government to resign. And this strike was led by already a small nucleus of communists calling themselves Marxist-Leninist Center Suriname, formed in 1969-1970. And they were following the ideological divide internationally between Russia and China, and they took on the Chinese side. And after the connection, after building a mass base in party terms, they founded in 1973 that was also a time in 73 where the second large general strike took place, also again by the teachers, who also sent this government home. And that was also led by this Marxist-Leninist Center, or KPSML, which had this paper, Rode Surinamer. So we started working together from the middle of the 70s up till the 80s. Right. That's how LOSON originated, and it had major departments in all the big cities, in Amsterdam, in Utrecht, in The Hague, and in Rotterdam.
Yeah, yeah, and there were a few things I noticed that I think are quite important to emphasize. One is that how many different mass organizations were involved, right? Yes. You were talking about the peasant unions, the teacher unions, the students, the workers, and this is also, with the PKI, there were about 3 million formal members, but there were like 20 million if you count the women's movement, the peasant unions, and so
later on,
so that was very big. I do want to, before we go on, and I want to get a bit more also into the kind of backlash that the PKI, amongst others, received. But I want to also give people the opportunity maybe to interject already with one or two more questions. Yes, please go ahead. Somebody? Yes, there's a mic coming.
So I read Wij Slaven van Suriname by Anton de Kom, which was, of course, written while colonialism in Suriname was very much still active. But in retrospect, with the decolonization of Suriname, what is your retrospective on it, considering that I think the sole official language of Suriname is still only Dutch, and I believe it's the only language taught in all schools as well?
Is this for Kenneth or for anyone, or for Fedra?
For the two people on the right, I guess.
Okay, for Fedra and for Kenneth. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for this question. Yes, Suriname is actually still very much, I think, a colonial society, also a very racist society. I don't know if the largest marker of that is the fact that Dutch is still the official language. There's so many different languages, of course, in Suriname, and well, Sranantonga is used as the lingua franca of it. Yeah, I don't know if this would be like the major point, because Dutch is still a language that can be used, also for the in big companies or like in law and that kind of stuff. So I don't know, I guess it serves a purpose, but for talking and for speaking between each other, everyone speaks Sranantonga. I think there's some people in the room who could also speak to, the struggle that has been held to recognize Sranantonga as an official or as an actual recognized language. But I think Suriname nowadays still has a lot of problems that Anton de Kom was writing about. But at the same time, I think there's also a very big call to move beyond the ethnic divisions that have been there, that have been instilled throughout history, throughout the politics of divide and rule that the Dutch installed. I don't know what your reflections would be on like the ethnic unity in Suriname nowadays. In my opinion, I see that you still see a lot of exploitations by the elite in Paramaribo, for example, that is exploiting the people in the more rural areas, in the interior. So that is maybe not such a hopeful
You're right.
note.
Well, concerning your question about language, in our Marxist definition, language is typical for a nation. And as we said, we were active on nation building. So we also consider this question about language. And we promoted our own language, of course, Surinamese language. For instance, we made this movie, Uma Fusranang, which is spoken all completely in our own language, in Surinamese language. The first and only movie I know in complete Surinamese language. There were some poets who were writing in Surinamese language. But like Fedra said, there was this national elite very much connected with the Dutch colonialists. Like, for instance, the now ruling party in Suriname. They call themselves still the Orange Party. And they were, in fact, in those days, even opposite to independence.
Right.
So it was still late in 1975 when one member of this party went over to the government, and then we could declare independence with 1 vote majority in parliament. It's very extraordinary. And this dependence on Holland was very ingrained in our mentality. People couldn't make a choice because this lingua franca, Surinamese, was not written. There was no grammar. There was no dictionary or something. We only spoke it between friends and comrades. No official language, no books. And that hindered us to make it an official language, I think. But you are right, it should be. Because, in fact, we are some kind of a deformed nation by not having our own language. So I agree with you on that.
You want to interject?
No, I just want to ask, you have 3 rather big groups there. You have the Creole people, you have the Hindustani, and you have the Javanese. And isn't that also a problem?
Oh, and there's the Chinese, the indigenous.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but the Hindustani, for instance, they are quite big. So and they speak Sanami. And then you have the Javanese. They speak Javanese. I mean, is that not a complicating factor?
Yes, yeah. Definitely. Like, I mean, all these people ended up in this country. I mean, no one really chose throughout history to go there. And this is one of the big issues, I think, in Suriname, trying to, move beyond these divides. But Sranatongo works as a lingua franca between all those different
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Still today, there is this racial thinking very much alive in Suriname. When we look at our political parties today, there is no change in before independence and now. All the parties are based on ethnic divide.
Right, it's divide and rule.
All of them, not one excluded.
Yeah, and one thing that also struck me about what you were explaining about the education, that there were no universities in Suriname until independence, which is very interesting, because I also know, I read from Kwame Nimako, that the first place where there was a leerplicht, so that you were obligated to go to school, was Suriname. But the thing is, they only wanted to give people like the really basic education, which is more like indoctrination, actually, because after slavery was abolished, they were afraid that people would go to the Maroons and basically become a rebellious society.
We didn't get our own history, our own geography, for instance. We were told on primary school, de Rijn komt bij Lobit ons land binnen. That's what we were taught.
Yeah.
We weren't taught about our own country. We didn't even know about our own country.
So no proper education, just enough to indoctrinate people.
Yes.
That was the essence of it, yeah. Is there another question? One more before I continue to the next segment. There you go. Yes, in the corner.
Hello, thank you. I was wondering if maybe you could speak a bit about the current forms of extractivism existing in Suriname, because obviously there was a lot of bauxite exported during the Second World War, and there's been talk of deals with China and Canada, and I mean, obviously also with what's happening in the Congo, I don't think we can talk about decolonial Marxism without acknowledging our dependence on that. What resistance can we see now? Yeah, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, indeed. So indeed, during the Second World War, people say that Europe couldn't have been liberated without Suriname, because Suriname was supplying so much of the bauxite, which is the one of the actually what aluminium is made for. So which was making the American planes fly. This has also led to a lot of displacement of Maroon communities in the 1960s afterwards to develop this aluminum industry. And later, what we see nowadays is indeed a lot of logging, so for the tropical wood, and gold mining. And this indeed has long been done by Canadian and Chinese companies, amongst others. And you see that actually, the fight for land rights is a continuous one in Suriname. So there has been also a major court case for the Inter-American Court for Human Rights, if I say it correctly, that was actually being won by the Maroon communities, but the current, successive Surinamese governments have not been implementing the stipulations. So actually the community leaders and the elders who have fought for that, they're becoming kind of, older now. But you do see a new generation of activists from the Maroon communities. So I know that Greenpeace is doing a lot of work actually within those communities, has held a program to bring those people to the Netherlands and kind of like show them around how Greenpeace does things. So you do see a lot of younger voices now stepping up from their own identity, from their own culture, saying, hey, like these are our lands, and after all these years, no one is doing anything to protect it. But at the same time, you see, young people from the interior, they also want to have opportunities in life. Like people need to make money this day and age. So a lot of young people are being forced actually into illegal gold mining, or even if they are working for example, one of those Chinese companies, often they don't even know about the dangers of the dangerous chemicals they're working with. So it's really this very difficult situation, because I think all of them might have loved to be climate activists, but not all of them have the luxury to be, because they also need to eat. So, when the only people in your community are the ones that are, doing the gold mining, that might go against your traditional and spiritual beliefs, but at the end of the day, people got to eat. This is, there's not much... I don't think at this point in time, there's not a lot to be hopeful about, because the situation is getting worse and worse, and rivers are being poisoned, rainforest is being destroyed. But at the same time, I do think that this new generation that is standing up now is, really what we should cling on to, hoping that they will bring about the change.
Kenneth, any additions?
Well, I certainly agree with Vedra. The extractivism in Suriname is a long time thing, from the beginning of the last century already, the bauxite, which was very easily exploited because it was on the top of the ground. There were not mines necessary. So mining was a very dangerous way of extracting, mostly. But in Suriname, the bauxite was just on the surface. And on some mountains, like in Mungo, they just put on some dynamite in some kind of those mountains, exploded them, and took the bauxite to the smelterij. It was in Afobaka. It was quite a distance, shipping them to there, where they made into a half product, aluinaarde, some kind of white powder thing, which is then made into aluminium. And that was done in 1918. It started, I think, with the Alcoa, the Aluminium Company of America, and also by the Dutch, the Billiton. But that was more also in Indonesia. Billiton was active, but other metals also, tin, for instance. But this bauxite was mostly extracted by the Alcoa, and they had this Surinamese firm called Suralco. In fact, my grandfather worked 40 years for this company until his pension. But okay, we had to live.
Yeah, you have to eat.
Yeah.
And still today, when we are talking about today, that's what the question was about. It's sad to say that now this year, they are going to extract the oil from our coast. That is done by all the big oil companies. We can call, Total Energies, BP, Chevron, all of them. They are Shell even getting parts, and even the Brazilian oil company is going there to extract oil. And this government, next month, or on May 25, there will be elections in Suriname, and the government is now, speculating on income from these oil revenues. So that's their election promise. Then I think we will come into a paradise, I think. But now this government suddenly, beginning of this year, in January, announced that a Chinese company will come and extract let me put it another way. When late 80s, beginning of the 90s, in those period, bauxite extraction declined. And in fact, Alcoa stopped with that. And there was an alternative, that was gold. And even this progressive calling itself NDP government brought in the Canadian gold robbers into Suriname, with open arms, by the way. And so Canadian companies are robbing our gold, Chinese companies are robbing our woods, other companies are going to get our oil revenues, and now another Chinese company is getting the rest of the bauxite. You see, they already extracted the eastern part of Suriname. Now, the western part, which is even a bigger volume of bauxite, is now promised to Chinese firm. So
you see that colonial power very often is being translated into corporate power, that the structure is not very much changing. Even though the Dutch have left, I think you see a lot of the systemic structures are still very much the same. I mean, in the end, I guess for someone in the interior of Suriname, it doesn't very matter so much whether it's a white person or a Creole person in power. If the effect is the same, then the situation is not that much better. And when I went into the interior, this is also what people were saying. They were saying, well, first, our own people sold us to the white man back in Africa. Yeah. I mean, this is maybe a bit of a generalized way of saying, but this is how they told me.
I think so.
And then nowadays we see our so-called brothers and sisters in the city doing the exact same thing. Yeah. When I go into those villages, you see there's no sewage systems, there's no hospitals. The roads are being totally wrecked because there's so many heavy trucks carrying the logs, the trees out of the area. But there's
huge trees.
Yeah, this is something that's not being very hopeful.
Yeah. And this makes a perfect bridge to the next part because, like you said, there is I know there will be another section with the Q&A, don't worry. But there is obviously a tension between, people do need to eat, obviously, as you mentioned, but the whole point is that this whole system is organized in a way that most of the money doesn't actually stay with the local community and it ends up with all these big corporations. And even within the international picture, it's still so dominated by the global north. Like I recently read a great paper on China, for example, because there are more and more Chinese companies doing these kind of things as well. But then what often happens is then these things are processed in China, but they end up in a supply chain, for example, for like an iPhone. And if you go higher up, like the highest profits in the supply chain, they tend to end up again in like corporations in the global north. It was like 80% of processed materials from abroad that are processed in China are by foreign invested enterprises. So it's huge. It's huge. It's absolutely huge, and it's a huge problem. And this was part, of course, of the American strategy, right? The American strategy was, okay, we might let them formally decolonize, we might let them get flag independence, but we will not give them real independence. And the way you phrased it, actually, I was immediately reminded of Kwame Nkrumah, who wrote the book Neocolonialism, the highest stage of imperialism, which was a wordplay on Lenin's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And he said exactly this tendency of basically they are fine with decolonizing as long as it's a right-wing government, as long as it's like a government who literally says we are for orange, basically. Fanon wrote about this, you know, they want to turn the movement to the right. So that's why also these communist movements had to fight way longer for liberation. They were sometimes fighting decades. Even when the colonizers in Vietnam were kicked out, the French were kicked out, then literally the Americans took over. They were like, well, we do it then. And this is the essential thing, I think, that drove basically the Cold War after World War II. One of the biggest bloodbath, apart from obviously the Vietnam War and the Korean War, which were major, millions of people killed. But these were at least wars. But Indonesia, something else happened. It wasn't even war. It was straight up massacres and executions. And this happened in 1965. Can you explain a little bit about what happened?
Well, I'll try to. Well, in '65, a military coup, actually. I come later to the details. But it immediately was followed by mass killings. First of all, the atrocities themselves. I mean, it started early October '65 until mid-'66, the massacre of 500,000 to 1 million people, forced disappearances, imprisonment of about 750,000 people, persecution, rape, sexual abuse, and an exile of many hundreds of people outside Indonesia. Who was targeted? Well, the PKI in the first place, with all this organized organizational layers, like leaders, cadres, ordinary
women's
members.
Movement was also very much targeted.
Yeah, and then the organizations that were formally or informally affiliated to the parties, of course, the women's organizations, culture organizations, peasants, workers, teachers, etc. And later on, also the followers of Sukarno were victims. So imagine thousands of school teachers and intellectuals were just wiped out. And what they were actually doing was wiping out a whole lot of political leaders who played a crucial role during the anti-colonial struggle. And during the fight for independence and during building the nation. So, okay, those killed were unlawfully executed, most of them. They were unarmed, absolutely not armed. The killers were, depending on the place, either military soldiers or militias and religious groups also, facilitated all by the army. So it was absolutely crazy, actually, because how is it possible that a legal party, the third largest communist party in the world, with a membership of 3 million and a basis of 20 million, could be crushed so easily and in such a short time? Why is it that in the course of time there has been no effort to get crimes punished? So it's total impunity, and there were no serious calls for state accountability by formal international bodies also. I mean,
there was even very large state complicity, right, by Western governments.
Yes.
They were supplying the lists to execute people.
Yeah, that was the USA and the British and the Germans in the first place, yeah. And so it is actually the worst massacres of the 20th century, or one of the worst massacres, even in the words of the CIA. Yeah. And it remained unknown, actually, very poorly examined also. And why was the anti-communist propaganda launched by Suharto, the Suharto regime that lasted for 32 years, full of lies and manipulations of historical narratives, etc., been so effective, so effective. And it had such a deep socio-political impact on the whole society until today. So many scholars and so have racked their minds about these questions. And there has been some research done, but still, officially, nothing is done to solve these problems. And, well, what was actually the trigger? In the night of the 30th September, a group of junior military officers of the Palace Guard, under the lead of a certain Lieutenant Colonel Untung, called themselves the 30 September Movement, abducted and killed 7 senior officers, including the army commander. And according to the statement, it was to forestall a coup by a so-called Council of Generals. There was a lot of rumors that generals wanted to take power because there was a lot of, tension between the army and the Communist Party, which that became so big, you know. But the thing is that very early, next morning already, the next day, Suharto took over power. And with the pretext of putting an end to what he called the treacherous coup attempt against Sukarno by the movement, by the 30 September movement.
Which is very ironic, considering that later he would start executing even followers of Sukarno.
Yeah.
Yeah. Please go on, but the propaganda is very obvious.
Yeah. So, well, there are many readings actually of what actually has happened, but a few things have become crystal clear. Is that the attempted coup by the 30th September movement was not done by the PKI. Well, at the most, indeed, Chairman Aidit was on the picture.
Yeah, he was on the picture before,
He had some mysterious role actually in a small group, and there were persons around him knew about the abduction of the generals. That is it. But no one else from the PKI knew anything.
Yes, but still they were blamed, right? Because they wanted to kill basically the communists.
Yeah. It was just turned around. Eh? Yeah. And Suharto was also not among the list of officers targeted for abduction or murder. He came out of the blue, and he handled the thing so swiftly. So, how much did he know? You know, so that's what the people think. And this was revealed. It was this declassification of the CIA documents in 2017. And it was revealed that one of the US strategies proposed before the coup for defeating the PKI was almost identical to what actually happened. So the PKI should, in their eyes, of the US, the PKI should be accused of an act of treason, which then would provide a pretext for massive army retaliation. That,
Yeah.
Okay, and that happened also in other countries.
Right. It became like a playbook, and there was even a term they used for it. No.
Jakarta method.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It basically it became in some cases even proudly announced, like fascists throughout the global south. They would proudly say, like, we'll bring the Jakarta method, this method of just mass executing leftists. We'll bring it to our countries. It happened in Brazil. It happened in many other places, and almost always backed by the United States, by the CIA, with funds, with intelligence, with execution lists, with weapons, of course. Yeah, and there's even a book by that name now.
The book is named Jakarta Method.
Right, exactly.
That's a title by Vincent Bevins. It was published in 2018. And Indonesia turns out to be the most successful of series of bloody interventions.
Okay. Sorry, I was... I'm basically being told that we're almost out of time.
Yeah.
So,
but actually, it's an interesting book. I mean, if you see how, I mean, it binds everything together.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'm gonna leave it here. I think we have some clear picture of what happened in Indonesia now after '65. If people want to hear more specifically about that, they can either ask now or go to you at the bar. But I do want to, because there's only 10 minutes left, and I want to give you an opportunity also to ask more specific questions that you're interested in. So if there are like 2, 3 last burning questions, then I want to give you that opportunity now. Yes, there was one there. I think that was the first. Maybe we can go like take 3 in one round, and then we offer them all at the same time. We take them all at the same time. So there's one there, and one in the back.
If we look at the current state of the world, do you also think we can find modern colonialism in a pacifistic way? Because all the examples you named are, fight with our armed battles. So do you think there's an opportunity for this in the modern times? General question to any of you who would like to answer.
Clear, thank you. This one maybe, yes?
Thank you very much for the details about the history of Indonesia and the struggle there. I'm very much interested because Sukarno has been in power for almost 20 years, 45 independence, still 65, and the movement was crushed, really crushed. Can you elaborate a bit about the accomplishment of that alliance of Sukarno in Indonesia? And also the weakness that they could be crushed in that way you mentioned, Kanina, before.
Clear, thank you. One more there.
Hi. I think my question goes a little bit to also what the previous question asked. I'm interested in lessons that you can give on organizing. In particular, you're all studied resistance against colonization and in the coloniality that we still live in. What are your tips for strategy and tactics? Thank you.
Right. Very clear. And also happy with that question. If you didn't ask it, I was going to, so thank you. We have one over here.
Yes. Since the topic is decolonial Marxism, maybe I would have wanted for us to discuss the successful revolutions that succeeded in really in the decolonial struggle, because they took up the Marxism, was their guiding ideology. And we can cite those examples. Well, first of all, Russia, and then China, Vietnam, Cambodia, even Cuba, and in South America, the so-called pink tide. They call it pink tide because it's not armed revolution, but mass movements inspired by Marxism, Leninism. They were successful, at least in kicking out imperialism or standing up to the big neighbor in the north, and asserting their own independent path of development.
Thank you. Thank you. Clear question. Successful examples, specifically Marxist examples in the Global South. One more here, and okay, those are the last two, and then we're gonna do. Oh God, there are three. Okay, last three.
Well, it's also part of the strategy thing. So Dutch workers have a relatively privileged position compared to workers in the Global South, and are basically profiting of imperialism. Do you have any tips on how we can unite and convince people that this system is also not in their interests, but because that's something that's very difficult, I find, in the Netherlands.
Yeah. Important question. Over here.
Yeah, so this is also premising your next panel that you're going to organize, Chris, on Decolonial Marxism Part 2. No, I'm very curious. The fact that in socialism, we tend to recognize that the worker has a particular position that is best positioned to fight the bourgeoisie or the rulers, the ruling class. Yeah. In colonialism, we tend to recognize that indigenous people are best positioned to recognize colonialism, even when the rest is paid off and goes along the way. Now, there's a tension between workers and indigenous people historically in different anti-colonial struggles. In South America, I know many to this day. And we haven't really touched upon, in Indonesia, there are 50 to 70 million indigenous people. Next with India, it's the country with most indigenous people in the world, not in the Americas. But we haven't really touched upon those very potent positionalities to fight colonialism and capitalism and how they've been divided and conquered and alienated from each other. So some reflection is very, very welcome from these amazing speakers, but also challenging you to a follow-up session.
All right. Thank you for that idea. Okay, we have a lot of questions. I'm gonna make a very short summary, and then you can kind of pick the ones that you think are most suitable for you. So one is the role of armed struggle, and if there's also a role for pacifism, or maybe, and then maybe I'm partially answering also, but maybe a combination of tactics, and what that would look like now. This one specifically for you about the accomplishments of Sukarno, and why the PKI was so easily crushed. Lessons organizing and strategy, examples of successful revolutions and the role Marxism played, and how to organize in a relatively privileged environment where workers earn higher wages than they do, in the Global South, and how we can also convince these workers that it is in their interest also to overthrow capitalism. And we had the last one on the tensions between workers and indigenous peoples, and how we actually, overcome that. You don't have to answer all of them. I'm going to go just from here to there and hope that all of them are answered by the end. And if not, maybe I'll toss something in the head. And I'm going to start with you.
Well, very concrete thing is the weakness of the PKI, or let's say the complex. Actually, the situation was very complex, and the army was getting stronger and stronger. That's the problem. And when actually the 50s were a very, very, very dynamic and very period with parliamentary democracy, and then Sukarno, well, under the pressure of the military, introduced, reduced actually the parliamentary freedom. He also banned some parties, etc., and he introduced what is kind of the guided democracy. And I think the main, I mean, the power configuration between the or the power balance between the army and the PKI was getting, I mean, it was coming to actually very tense. And yeah, and then you had this economic chaos. I mean, the economic situation was very, very bad under Sukarno at the point. Yeah. And that also didn't help very much to, let's say, to get that put a kind of blanket over.
Yeah, made it easier basically to take power.
Yeah.
And a large part, because you mentioned the tension building up, right?
Yeah.
But a large part of the military was also being trained in the United States.
Also, yes.
Which obviously builds up to the tension.
There were already, before '65, there were already interventions.
Right.
By the US.
Right.
And like revolts or rebellions in Sumatra, for example, and they were backed by the US.
Yeah.
Very.
Yeah. And the PKI was, of course, not prepared actually for an armed struggle. And this is
not at all, because nobody was armed.
Yeah. Yeah. And this had a huge impact, obviously, on strategizing later. That people realized, you know, we need to be prepared.
Yeah.
This kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And any lessons, other lessons, or one of the other questions that you wanted to address? Or any last words? It's okay if you're done, or
yeah. I mean, I think it's quite difficult because, like for example, the workers. How can you get the workers? See what their actual
material interests are in overthrown capitalism.
Yes.
Okay, well maybe then we'll let them handle those questions.
Yes. Okay.
Totally fine. All right, Kenneth.
I don't know how much
you
time
gave them very difficult questions, huh?
Very difficult questions, sorry. Yes.
There are quite some questions open now. In general, the perspective of armed struggle today, if I understood correct.
Yeah, but also maybe I think they were also asking if pacifism or non-violent struggle can play a role. If you know, go ahead, or maybe a combination of. It was asking about strategy and tactics, but also the place of armed struggle. But if there's also a non-violent way, that was kind of the question.
Okay.
Answer it any way you like.
Well, let me put it this way: Allende tried the peaceful way.
Yeah. Can you explain who Allende is?
Well, Allende was the president of Chile who thought he could bring socialism through parliament into Chile. And he was crushed by the American immediately after he mentioned socialism. So Allende even advised the military not to interfere with that. So it depends on your ideology, what tactic is being used, or strategy, and we don't agree with the tactics of Allende. We didn't in our days.
Right, right.
We were indeed in favor of armed struggle for liberation, like in Vietnam. We supported the national democratic struggle in Vietnam and other colonies in Africa and elsewhere. From even Mr. Mugabe, and then revolutionary, to Sobukwe, South Africa, and the Sandinistas, for instance, in Nicaragua, who were reaching armed struggle.
I do want to clarify with Allende, he did actually win those elections. He did become president.
Yeah,
but then basically
he was in power.
He was overthrown by a CIA-backed coup.
coup.
Fascist dictatorship was installed, ruled for decades, executed people, rounded them up, etc.
Yeah.
Very similar to 65.
Yes.
Yeah, and also what in the case of Chile, already some years before the coup, actually, the U.S. played a strong role in ruining, destroying the economy.
Right. Nixon literally said, "Make the economy scream," and this was, sanctions, economic warfare.
Yeah.
It's also something we see a lot, right? In Cuba, literally, they were saying explicitly, we know now by the declassified files, they wanted to cause hunger in Cuba. Like, it was literally the policy goal.
Yeah.
And this happened obviously also in Chile and many other places. But please continue, Kenneth. Yeah.
Okay. So on strategy and tactics, I must say we quite were very in the line of the Comintern when it's about internationalism and within our country. We were following the line of what was proposed at the Second Congress of the Communist International for communist parties.
And maybe you can translate that to now. Like, what is there like a specific lesson that would be very useful now?
There, indeed, you mentioned it briefly. Within the Comintern and also within the Soviet Union, there was very much attention in those days for the eastern part of the world, the East. The East was coming up.
Yeah.
Asia was heating up. India, China, fighting for independence, and they had special attention for the East.
Right.
And we were more in that line.
Right. So understanding that maybe the global South is like the most potent place for revolution.
It was indeed, because there were many theoretical discussions about revolution and is it something that can be exported. All those theories were. You see, there was also, I must say to my regret, much verwarring. How do you say that? Confusion about strategy and tactics in many left-wing movements.
Yeah.
So to find out the right line, it's a matter of experience, like ours also in Suriname. We had to learn about what it means to have a good leadership, how important that is, and we are in a very difficult position today for not having even a party.
Right.
So that's very regretful. Then about the successes of revolutions, we can agree on that. They are very inspiring. They were very inspiring for us to see. When I saw as a student how the American left Vietnam, well, I jumped in the air that day. It was very inspiring to see. Well, even this Onion Revolution in Portugal, for instance, was not really a revolution in the traditional sense, but everywhere you could see people were standing up, fighting for liberation. So that was indeed, a very in Vietnam, in other countries like Mozambique, where they gained victory. Then the relation between workers and indigenous people. These are also indeed part of what we call the national question for every country. In every country where different nationalities or ethnic groups are living, you have to have a program on this. So it depends mostly on the level of development of capitalism in that country, where like for instance, in my country, in Suriname, we only have a very small working class because of a small population, but also because of only a few huge industries.
Yeah.
So mostly the working class is to be found within industry, but our industry is not that developed. So there's only the most, and in many other countries, it is the agrarian revolution, which is main thing. And in that part of the agrarian revolution, it is about, indeed, the rights of the indigenous people on their land and the recognition of the rights of national minorities. So in that sense, there is no contradiction for us between indigenous people and the working class. In fact, they should form a united front.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And that's what I would
Yes,
like
you
to
actually
say.
answered almost all of them.
Okay.
So good job.
The rest
Very
is
good, very good, very good.
Yes, you can basically feel free also to add to things that were said before. I think the only one that we didn't address was handling the workers in the global north.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, you want to? All right, go ahead. And then you can just add on anything you want after Feta.
The only thing I would like to say is that there were some critics about, in the left-wing movement, about the privileged position of, indeed, white workers in the North. And there is something to say for it, but also against it. Because we mustn't forget that, as Lenin analyzed, the huge surplus, or call it profits, the imperialists made, they had the money to buy off these people and put them in their service.
Yeah.
So many social democratic leaders were paid by the capitalists for doing their dirty job.
Yeah, and how do we change that?
By having a policy that is correct and really represents the interest of the working class.
Yeah, but it's
okay. I might add a little later, but maybe you'll slam dunk this one. Feel free, basically, and any of the points that were made or any last words that you have.
Sure. Well, I studied quite a particular, couple specific black Marxists, right? So that was Anton de Kom, Otto and Hermina Huiswoud. And one way in which they set themselves apart from, I think, other black radicals was that they were preaching this international solidarity. So where a lot of, black Marxists were saying, for example, like a Marcus Garvey, is like, we need to focus on our own, we need to focus on Africa, we have to have like our own institutions, our own banks, we need to fix our own shit. And let's look at us, our own people. I think people like Anton de Kom were always considering people from all races and all ethnicities, and going around the world and preaching this message of international solidarity is, I think, key to what we're seeing in the world right now. So, and there I would like to highlight also the power of a story and of a narrative. I think violence might be needed in some contexts, but ideally we wouldn't use it. So Anton de Kom, for example, was someone who was being regarded as an inspiration for all Surinamese people. He had these legends forming around him. He was being seen as the interlocutor of Gandhi. He was being seen as being able to communicate with the Dutch Queen. He was seen as a black messiah who would liberate everyone. He was being rumored to be able to appear in multiple places at the same time. And this is what mobilized everyone. When he came back to Suriname, everyone wanted to see him. The Maroons got inspired. They asked if they could hide weapons in his house. He was like, no, please don't. But it was very powerful. And I think this is the type of inspiration that we need, to realize that is something that they already did. They said, no one is free until everybody is free. And I really hope that this message of international solidarity with people, even if they're not like your own, will be more prominent. And I think this is also what we need nowadays if we look at what is happening in Palestine, in Congo, and whatnot. Because these people were already looking at that and writing about that. I hope, maybe it is in vain. I hope that this can be attained without violence.
Right. And I mean, also, it's good to, sometimes don't fetishize the armed struggle, right? Like the ANC was started in 1912. Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed faction started in 1961 because they were literally banned. They had to go underground, right? So it's not like the one or the other. It depends on the context. It depends on a lot of things. You cannot do a one-size-fits-all. One thing I wanted to add maybe on the workers here, it is, I think, just empirically true that the wages that are earned here cannot be globalized. People have done the calculations. It just can't. People do earn a lot higher here, and that has everything to do with that kind of colonial compromise. But that being said, capitalism is an extremely inefficient system. It is extremely wasteful. Just because they earn more doesn't mean they get a better life. Everything is made literally to expire within 1 or 2 years, so you have to buy another one. People don't actually have their basic necessities met, like education, like schooling, like healthcare. These should be free, these should be universal. So there is a better road to win with much smaller economic or physical footprint. And I think that's an important message, and people have done the math. It's very clear that it is very possible. But I do agree very much with what you both say, that clearly kind of the first place where the biggest revolutions will come are in the global south. But we will see, once they rise up and we cannot depend on their labor, things will get tougher here too, and things will get more promising in that direction as well. And I think you wanted to say one last thing?
No. I just want to say that I agree very much with I mean, we have to push for or to introduce again the significance of solidarity, because it has gone lost actually at the moment, and I think that basically it all comes from capitalism, which is what you said yourself. So it's very good to there are in the world all kinds of experiments for more communal living, etc. So those kind of things we have has to be more raised, and we can learn from it,
Right. Yeah. On that note, because we are over time, so I'm going to finish it now. But on that note, I'm going to wrap up. Actually, if you want to learn more, I saw a really great bookshop right around the corner. It was selling Anton de Kom and others that we've been talking about. Also, you are releasing a new book about the Maroons. And it is on
10th of April in the Black Archives. So
be there for the book launch.
Launching my little book.
If you want to buy my book, I also have some. You can come to me.
Yeah.
All right. Always awkward, but okay. And then just a few last announcements. Obviously, we are in the week against racism. There's a full program all week. The most important thing of all is to show up on Saturday on the national demonstration on Dam Square at 1 o'clock. There's also a full festival program on Thursday with like workshops, panels, performances, music, and all kinds of things. If you have personally experienced racism or other forms of discrimination, there is a booth by discriminatie.nl, like right around the corner here, where you can actually do a melding. You can also just do that online through discriminatie.nl. And last but not least, I wanted to also invite you to the Decolonial Reparations Conference on the 19th of April, which is organized by Arles, and it is entirely actually on the anniversary of Bandung and trying to bring more international solidarity with the Global South in our organizing here. So be very welcome to come there. And with that being said, thank you for coming, and I wish you a very warm evening.